So I'm here with Chris Tran, and I'm going to be doing my interview with her, my diversity interview with her, for our T3 class. So, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to do this for me. I'm just going to ask you a few questions and then go ahead and answer them however you wish. If there's a question that you don't feel comfortable answering, go ahead and just let me know, and you don't have to answer it. I'm not going to force you to,
Okay.
right? Um, the first one I want to ask you is, well, the first thing I do want to ask you, can you tell me what your ethnic background would be considered?
So I am officially three-quarters Chinese, mostly
Okay.
from southern mainland China, and one quarter Vietnamese,
Okay.
as kind of like my official bloodline. I feel like I've definitely grown up a little bit more Vietnamese because
Okay.
that's where my family like emigrated from. They went from China to Vietnam, and then from Vietnam to America. So I feel like I'm a little bit more in touch with my Vietnamese culture, despite being mostly Chinese and having my main dialect be a Chinese dialect. So
Oh,
yeah, a
awesome.
little weird.
Awesome. Now, I know with mine, I'm mainly Spaniard, but
Hmm.
we grew up with more of the Hispanic background, and so
Yeah.
I'm more,
Hmm.
I identify more as Hispanic than I would
Exactly.
Spaniard.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
awesome. Um, so the one of the questions I want to ask is, how was growing up as a member of a marginalized ethnic group?
So that's kind of an interesting thing because the first thing when I was younger and where I originally lived in Tirasana, um, there weren't as many Asian people, whether or not they're like Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, any of those kinds. Like I didn't have too many friends who fell under those categories or under those races. So I grew up till about sixth grade being kind of the weird one out. Like people made a big deal about me being Asian, um, those sort of things. Like yeah, and then I in seventh grade I moved here to Del Mar, which is a little bit more. It's a lot more common to see people of the Asian background
Uh-huh.
here. So it was definitely a huge I want to call it a culture shock almost to suddenly be surrounded by people who were actually like me and didn't make a huge deal of, oh my gosh, you got your A because you're Asian and you're smart.
Okay.
It was a lot more of hey, you studied really hard for this, you did really well, and it's not because your Asian gene kicked in or something like that.
All
So it
right.
was definitely like an interesting transition.
Interesting. So there's a couple things that you said. One that you felt like the basically the odd man out, the weird one,
Hmm.
where you are originally from. When you say that, did you feel like you were ever bullied, or how did that affect you, like just mentally or emotionally?
Um, there were definitely some things that happened. I remember one in particular. I ended up having a crush on another guy in my school when I was back in that area, and he happened to be Asian, and everyone was making jokes about like, oh, Asian people marry their brothers and stuff like that, because we were two of the only Asian people in the school, and they're like, oh, of course, she likes him, like duh. So it was like kind of like not so innocent teasing in that sense,
Yeah.
and but it was very obviously linked to the fact that I am Asian and he's Asian, so therefore,
Right.
of course, they're gonna be together.
So did you feel like you were stereotyped in a sense
Oh yeah,
because of that?
a lot, definitely. It's one of those things where it's like the kids didn't even realize that they were doing it because they don't really understand
Right.
what these mean, or really understand what the culture was. So yeah, yeah.
Awesome. I don't. I'm sorry. I don't mean to get really have you get emotional or anything. So if I again, if I ask anything that you don't feel comfortable answering, just let me
Yeah.
know. Um, the next question: what opportunities were yours as a member of the marginalized or ethnic group?
So thinking back, I feel like the biggest influence or kind of the biggest place where my how I was perceived really mattered was mostly school. Um, and I mean, like everyone knows the stereotypes. Like Asian people are smart, so I always ended up being like the teacher's favorites and stuff. So I guess that's an opportunity in the sense that like even when I got like detention like once or twice in my life, it was really simple, and they were like, "You're usually a good kid. You can just go." So I feel like a lot of that was, even if I had a friend who did the same thing, they'd get a lot harsher punishment. But then they'd look at me, and I'd be like an Asian girl. I've got decent grades, and they're like, "You're fine. You didn't actually really do anything." So I feel like that's
Interesting.
part of it.
Interesting, because usually when you hear like those types of stories, at least um, the way I grew up, it was mostly mainly Caucasian students who would have that favoritism to where it's like, oh, don't worry about it, go home, or
Yeah.
slap on the wrist compared to somebody else who was of a
Yeah.
different ethnicity would have a harsher punishment. So it's interesting
Yeah.
to hear you say that because of your ethnicity, you were treated a little bit different.
Yeah, it definitely goes back to that whole like model minority thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like we, for whatever reason, are like hailed as like the good minority or something. I've heard that
Right.
before, and I really thought it was odd. But I feel like a lot of it was unconscious stereotypes toward that model minority, and those positive stereotypes of oh like this girl's good at math because she's Asian, so therefore she's like my favorite in the class because she gets like A's on tests and stuff like that.
Interesting. So to counter that question, what opportunities were not yours because you're a member of your group?
Um, how do I want to go into this? So I feel like this is sort of a twofold thing, because I feel like the way that people treat Asian women and Asian men are also very, very different because of the sort of, again, going back to the perception of Asian women, how they're supposed to act, how they're supposed to behave, the way that they speak, even the activities that they partake in. One of my main hobbies that I do for just kind of like my personal enjoyment is competitive video gaming. And I've learned to be, from lots of experiences, to be very, very careful about letting people know, one, that I'm a female, and two, that I'm an Asian female. Because I've gotten incredible amounts of inappropriate responses to either of those cases. On top of that, straight up refusal for people to play with me because I am an Asian female, which I don't fully understand, but yeah.
Wow.
So.
Okay. So a lot of gender stereotyping, gender roles applied to that situation.
Yeah. hmm And I
Interesting.
don't seem to see that in, like, I have a lot of Asian guys who play video games as well. I don't seem to see it as much with them, and I've asked them about it too. They say they've never really had any issues being Asian or anything like that, um, but they see it with me. Like,
That's it. Yeah. And do they have any comments about that? Like, how do they feel about people judging you in a way just because you are an Asian female?
I mean, they don't like it, but at some point it gets to be like, well, what are you gonna do? It's like online. You can't really like punish them or do anything about it. You really just have to leave at that point.
Right. And do they feel the same way in a sense that because you're an Asian female that you shouldn't be doing video games competitively, or are they more, just let you do it?
I've been told both. I've been told that I know how people see me, and I willingly put myself in those positions. Um, for me, I don't like that argument because I don't feel it's right for me to get shoved out just because of something that I couldn't control. Others are like, just mute them and never talk to them, never interact with them, just show up and play and do whatever. So usually those are the two big answers that I get.
Interesting. Like it. What strengths do you attribute to being a member of your ethnic group? Is there anything specific that you think because you do associate yourself as an Asian American, um, that you feel that enhances any specific skill that you have?
I wouldn't say necessarily because I'm Asian. I have like certain skill sets that I consider stronger. I would say it's more based around because of how I was raised in the culture. So there's a lot of emphasis on respect and discipline, um, trying like always pushing to be higher and higher than you currently are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily like, oh, because I'm Asian, I'm better than other people. It's because I'm Asian and these are the things that we value. This is why I am where I am today.
Awesome. And Um, because you said you brought up the way that you were raised with, being very respectful and kind of obedient. In one of our chapters that was specifically dedicated to the Asian American culture, it did reference that, of course, I can't generalize it across all Asian American ethnicities,
Yeah.
but, or even families for that matter, but it did say there was an emphasis on discipline, and you had there's a importance in achieving good grades and being obedient and making your parents proud, and that would be honorable to them.
Yeah.
And if you strayed from that, it would be more of a dishonor. And if you did behave in a negative way, that it would seem like a lack of discipline on your parents' part. Can you speak to that at all?
I absolutely 100% agree to that. A lot of it is, or a lot of what I've aspired to, or what I'm like working toward, is out of respect to my parents and understanding the things that they've given up, the life that they live for not just me, but also my brother and my sister. They worked really hard to save money so that we could go to college, encouraged us to, like, I know it's a stereotype, but it's true. We were given two choices: you become a doctor, you become a lawyer.
Okay.
But it wasn't necessarily an issue of, all right, well, I want you to become a doctor or a lawyer because, prestige, crazy, like, yeah, woo. It's more of a, like, they realize that, one, education is one of the biggest things that helps you succeed in life, and two, doctors and lawyers, those are two of the most highest respected jobs out there. So if I did pursue one of those jobs, I would be pretty much ensured a happy and comfortable life. So yeah.
And one more, just going back to that, I know that in the book it states that fathers were more distant from their children and less nurturing, and the mother, stepped in to take that. I'm gonna be the nurturing one. I'm gonna be taking care of you guys economically. I'm gonna be the one disciplining you. Yet mothers in Asian cultures are less nurturing than, say, a mother from a Hispanic culture or an African American culture. Can you speak to that?
I'm not sure exactly about most other cultures. I definitely saw a huge disconnect compared to the way my parents raised me. So the way my dad acted, and my mom acted versus like a Caucasian friend's parents. Like I'd see stuff like a kid would do, a kid friend of mine would do something like, in my eyes, insanely terrible. Like, he threw trash on the floor. Oh my god, he's gonna get like smacked around for that. And then the mom would just be like, "Ah, okay, I'll pick it up. I'll throw it away, whatever." Like that was a crazy huge disconnect for me. Like, my mom would have not been happy.
Not allowed that.
I wouldn't even consider doing that in the first place. If there is trash, that is going in the trash can. There's no question about that. So yeah, my mom was definitely the one who was like guiding us through school, taking us to our piano practices. She would be the one who would, ground us or do any like other discipline or anything like that. So yeah, she would also be the one, cooking all the dinners and making sure we had lunch for school and stuff like that. And my dad, yeah, worked insane hours. So he was always the distant, like really, really distant, like financial provider. Um, I never really thought that was a bad thing, I guess.
Yeah, and it's not to say that it's a bad thing, because even coming from a Hispanic family, I know with me, my mom was the one who was making the dinner and taking us to school and then to practice and all these other after school activities, and then coming home and making sure we did our homework, just because my dad was the one who was working insane hours. He'd go in at 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning, get home at 8 or 9.
Same.
And so it was just like the fact that he was working so hard to provide for us, that we didn't see him. So it was harder for him to get away to go to our baseball or softball games, or any sporting event like that.
Exactly.
But saying that, with you realizing it was more of his work hours, do you feel it was more just because he was being the provider that he was distant, or do you think that culturally that is kind of the role he took on of being more distant from the children?
I feel like it's a little bit of both. I know my dad, as a natural person, I'm not sure exactly if it was his cultural history or his personal history or anything like that that led him to be like this. But he tends to be very emotionally distant. But that's sort of a trade off of he's very logical and likes to think things through. So I think in that sense, like yes, he's emotionally distant, but not because of a lack of caring.
Right.
You know?
Okay. Next question. What types of oppression based experience have you had, if any?
Oppression based experience. Well, I named the gaming thing, which is still ridiculous to me. Um, I've been playing video games for like 5 years now. Um, I can't think of anything in particular, and I sort of, there's anything involved with race with me, I attribute it back to the whole model minority and all the positive stereotypes that come with it.
Okay. So it's never been like a really negative type of oppression towards you, just kind of stereotypical stuff,
Yeah.
and again, like the model minority.
Yeah, like it does get annoying to hear, oh, she got an A because she's Asian, and I like literally studied for 12 hours to get that A. But it's definitely not the sort of, all right, well, like Asians are like bad people, so therefore we got to be scared of them. So anything
Right.
like that, like the other ridiculous stereotypes that you hear.
Got it. What privileges have you had as a member of the group? I know that you had mentioned, you know, the whole detention thing, and because you're Asian, you kind of got a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
And is there anything else that you can think of?
Mm, I feel like everything else other people see as a perk, and I just think it's really odd. There's like the whole yellow fever thing. Because I've straight up been told that I'm attractive because I'm Chinese and Chinese people are cheap.
Oh wow!
Someone said that straight to my face. It was very awkward. I was
Yeah.
all right. Thanks for linking me with about like 2 billion people in the world. Awesome, cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm that attractive to you.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a sad day.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Like,
all right. What expectations for the future do you have?
um, in what sense?
I think personally for you as well as for your culture, like you're saying, there are these stereotypes that have been going on for centuries. What is your hope for the progression of that?
Well, I'm actually okay. So there's this. So seeing, I don't know. Have you seen Crazy Rich Asians at all?
No, not at all.
You should go watch it. Honestly, it's amazing. But like something like that, I think that's incredible to me because looking back over my childhood, you don't really see Asians in media, even Asian Americans in media. It's very very uncommon. I know like when I was a kid, my one of my biggest heroes was Mulan because it's literally like she's Chinese. I don't even identify that much with Chinese people, but she's Chinese. You kind of look like me. So that it's seeing like that kind of stuff on the screen and realizing that I can have like a hero who is Asian because there weren't really that many Asian role models for me to really link to. Um, so when I remember when Crazy Rich Asians came out, like that was a movie that I went and saw like 5 times in the theater. I hate going to theaters. I really really hate going to theaters, but I saw that 5 times in theaters because it's such a I want to say almost a moment of solidarity of realizing like people are finally getting and realizing that Asian people have personalities. They have these likes and these dislikes that may or may not line up with all these stereotypes that people have, and that was really awesome to me because like I said, I've gotten stereotyped and it's mostly been positive, but it still sucks. Like, I have my likes and dislikes. Just because I'm Chinese doesn't mean I speak Chinese fluently. Just because I'm Vietnamese doesn't mean I like pho. Um, like, just because I'm Asian, like I can be good at math and because I understand it, but that's because I spent like an average of 3 or 4 hours a night studying it. Like I don't just get it just because I'm Asian. So things like that, and having people realize we have worthwhile stories. Our culture is important to learn about and understand about, not just to remember who we are historically, but who we are like today. You know,
Awesome. That is awesome.
it's a great movie. You should watch it, by the way. I love it. It's so
I'll
good.
keep it in my mind. No, because I saw the previews first. So I was like, I really want to go see it. But like you, I don't really go to the movie theaters. And to try and get my boyfriend to go to a movie theater, it's like, we'll get to the mall. And then he'll do everything he can to miss the movie so he can be like, oh, it looks like we're not going to make it. So I don't know. I'll have to wait until it's like on DVD, or I can order it and stream it on one of the movie channels.
It is a great movie. Like, it's nothing amazing or mind blowing, but at the same time, it is mind blowing. You'll understand when you see it. It was a really odd feeling.
Awesome. All right. I think that might be the last question that. Sorry.
No, don't worry about it.
Okay. Yeah, I have two more questions for you. The first one is, how is it for you to talk about your experience as a member of a marginalized or ethnic group?
It's kind of nice, honestly. It's something that I don't really think about because I think we were mentioning this earlier. Like, I'm constantly surrounded by it. Like, I'm simultaneously constantly aware that, hey, I'm Asian, but also at the same time, because I'm always living it, I kind of forget to realize what an impact it has on my life and how much it impacts my identity. So it's definitely cool. We actually had a really cool conversation earlier in the office about, so Laura, who's Caucasian, like, she has extremely different views from the way that a lot of Eastern cultures kind of raise their kids and treat them and stuff like that. So she has a really unique experience where she's Caucasian and she grew up in America, but went and taught in Korea for 2 years. And then there's me, who I've never been to Asia at all. I am only barely fluent in the dialects that I speak, but I am an Asian American person who's grown up in a Western world. Um, so it brought along this really interesting conversation of kind of what it's like for, I guess, essentially for me to grow up Eastern in a Western world.
Right.
So
Yeah. I know that is one thing that has been coming up a lot, is because, well, most ethnic groups that are here in the States, they're taken from that, and they grow up only knowing what is around them in this area, and they don't have as much of a feel or connection to where they're actually from, or where their ancestors are from, or their relatives are from.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting, as I was mentioning earlier to you, taking the diversity class, that it's finally made me sit down and be like, I want to know. Like, I want to know where my ancestors came from. I want to know where my great grandparents came from, how they were raised, how we got to where we are.
Yeah.
So I've just been totally intrigued by talking to everybody I have about, their culture, and I think that's been my new thing lately, because I'm more aware of it now. Is every time I meet somebody new, it's like, oh, tell me about your background. Like, where did you grow up from? Like, what are your beliefs? And I may come up as a weirdo, and then I have to explain to them, like, sorry,
I swear, I'm not weird.
I was like, I swear I'm not weird. I was like, I'm just really in tune, like, with this class that I'm taking. So so it's actually really nice to actually hear these stories from people.
Yeah.
My last question, it would be, how would it be different or the same if you were not from your group? If that makes sense.
Oh, I would have gotten whacked around a lot less. Like, yeah, that sounds really bad. I swear it's not as bad as it sounds.
You're like, I didn't get beat, but I got beat.
Yeah, I didn't get the crap kicked out of me, but I kind of did. The intent was good. Like, same thing with my parents. Like, it wasn't for the idea of, like, God, I hate my kid, like, they're terrible children. It's, no, I love my child so much, and I want them to be raised as well as they can be, and this is the best way that I know how. So the intent was always extremely, extremely caring and concerned for my well-being. It just hurt a lot.
With you saying that, I know I said that was the last question, but with you saying that, again, in one of the chapters that we read, it said, Asian Americans have this view of why should I reward my kid when they're doing what they're supposed, what's expected of them,
Yeah.
and so they tend to be more of the disciplinarian. Do you find that to be true, or what are your beliefs? So you find it true to when you were growing up. What do you believe of it now, like working in the education system, and you know how we are trying to reward kids for good behavior, and how does that conflict with how you were raised?
Actually, this was a really interesting conversation that I had with my uncle. So my family's huge, massive, by the way. So I'm 25, and my uncle, who's currently raising his kids, has children who are 9, 5, and 3 years old. So there's a huge disconnect between our ages and how we were raised. So for me, it was very common for me to, instead of being not necessarily never rewarded, but it was much less common for my mom to be, hey, you know, you got the A, or, and it was more common for my dad to be like, all right, well, you got 100, but you missed the extra credit. Why didn't you get 105?
Oh wow!
He actually he said that to me. It was pretty funny. So like that second scenario was way more common for me, and I was kind of having this discussion with my uncle and his wife about how we were raised. If I left my towel on the floor instead of hanging it up, I would get spanked. And my aunt has never done that with her kids, and it's just this crazy huge disconnect because I realized how different my uncle, who primarily grew up in the American.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Amanda, you do it again?
I really hope she doesn't do it again.
I know.
But yeah, so my uncle, who his family immigrated here when he was 5, versus my mom, who I believe when she immigrated here she was 15. So she had already been growing up in that like really, really disciplined, really, really strict Asian culture. Versus my uncle, now he's very similar to me, where he's Eastern but thrown in a Western world.
And I know I said that was the last question, but this is
more.
really the last question. I promise. No, it's just because I find it so interesting, like to read what people's actual experiences are compared to what's in the book, because it's so important as a therapist specifically that you can't get one Asian in and then another one and think, oh, they're all the same.
Yeah, exactly.
They all followed, like they all grew up the same, whatever. It's the same thing with anybody, from an African American group or from a Hispanic group, etc. Like everybody's raised different, and so that's why I think it's so interesting to talk about it.
Yeah.
But my question is, being Eastern, growing up in a Western world, growing up in the traditional, family with the traditional Asian beliefs of discipline and honor and obeying. How do you see yourself when you have kids, raising your kids? Do you see it being a mix of both? Do you see it more westernized, or would you fall into the more traditional aspects?
I think naturally it will probably be a little bit more westernized because I just honestly I just have so many more examples of Western parenting, and especially right now with our job, it's very, in my eyes, it's a very, very American thing. Like you reward a child for, hey, good job for putting away that toy just like I asked you. Here's a stamp or something like that. But there definitely will be influences from the way that my parents raised me. Like it's still going to be expected that they're going to grow up very respectful. They're going to understand that education is probably one of the most important things, and the only thing that really trumps that is family. So I want to argue it's going to be more Eastern. Realistically, it's probably going to be a little bit more Western just because of where I've grown up, and how much of a disconnect there is from me and my Eastern culture. Because I only know what's been diluted from what we have here.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you, Chris, for taking the time to do this. I know it's a Friday night, so
all good.
I just wanted to thank you. I really do appreciate it. It was actually really interesting just to hear like kind of how you grew up and what your beliefs are and more about your culture.
Thank you for thinking it's interesting.
No.
Not a lot of people will just let me talk about myself for an hour.
Oh no, thank you. So let me go ahead and